I've been involved in historic preservation now almost 40 years, since I was 17 years old. It is a passion for me. It's a passion because it's important. It's a passion because preservation doesn't cost, it pays. It pays all of our communities in Kansas and Missouri and Oklahoma and Nebraska and Iowa, all the good states in the Union, for all of our communities. Historic preservation spending in Hannibal, Missouri in the last 10 years has been over $30 million. Artists have picked up from all over the country and left the artist colonies in New Mexico and California and come to Hannibal and bought up old buildings. There's a guy named Richard Florida who wrote a book, a wonderful book, interesting book. I don't agree with everything in it, but it's a really good book. He was head of regional planning for Carnegie Mellon, and he was a professor, still is. I think he's left Carnegie Mellon now. He wrote a book called The Rise of the Creative Class, and it was a book for small communities about reinventing yourself and understanding that if you don't attract a large group of creative thinking people to your community, you're not going to attract the kinds of businesses that are looking for those kinds of people today, high-tech companies, all these kinds of things. And in the Rust Belt, we ended up in Rock Island, where I used to be head of economic development for a not-for-profit there in Rock Island, Illinois. During the farm crisis in the 80s, you know, it was like last person out, turn off the lights. It was a deep depression, and the only farm manufacturing company left standing was John Deere. And so we ended up with all these factories. So we just got on planes and flew out to California and started beating on all these doors saying, you know, we'll give you these buildings. And eventually we were successful in bringing these small high-tech companies to Rock Island and all the upper story lofts in the buildings downtown. And that's happening in Hannibal right now. Hannibal is a bit of a seedy little river town, just like it was in Huck Finn and Mark Twain and in Tom Sawyer. There's 2/3 of the people that live in Hannibal have been there since Tom Sawyer. I own a house. One of Mark Twain's best friends was Alfred Lamb, and used to write letters back to his wife Livy when he came to Hannibal to visit when he got older, many times over the years, about how he and Mr. Lamb got so drunk playing billiards in the billiards parlor that they had to drag him onto the couch that night, and the women were all mad at him, and the whole house smelled like cigars. And I just love this stuff, you know, so it's really cool. Hannibal has one of the largest international tourist bases in the world. We do about $30 million a year in tourism for a town of 18,000 people. And it's funny, I was just in Jamaica with my wife, and sitting around with all these people, Iranians and Vietnamese couples and Germans and Italians and Canadians, lots of Canadians. And you say Hannibal and everybody knows about Hannibal. It's where Mark Twain was raised. So preservation is a big deal for Hannibal. It's a big deal for small communities. It's a big deal for big communities. Wichita has a lot of preservation going on. I just went during lunch and looked at a mid-century building that was a power company's building, and it's just an unbelievable structure with fabulous windows. And the Kansas City architect is urging the developer to rip out all the original windows and put in new windows. And you know, they needed a third independent decision. We went in 20 minutes we designed how to get a thermal break on the windows, how to repair them, and save about $500,000, if not more.
That should talk.
That talks. Money talks. We can talk about the warm and fuzzy aspects of preservation all day long. The cultural aspects of preservation matter to me as much as anybody in the world. It really does matter to our communities. But if we don't talk about the economic realities of it, we lose. The only way that we take the narrative back, when the narrative has been stolen from us, it's owned by the people that are anti-preservation, that somehow think that preservation is a left-wing conspiracy to take away your property rights, and they can all kiss my you-know-what. I am tired of being defensive about preservation. 5 years ago, I decided to be offensive. My wife would tell you I'm offensive all the time. But the fact is that we're here and everybody else is here. I teach the worst at-risk kids in Hannibal historic preservation trades every day from the high school. They are told that they are the dregs of the world, that they're stupid. They're the smartest kids I've ever worked with. They're the brightest, most engaged kids I've ever worked with. No one ever paid attention to these kids. These kids are learning to be historic preservation contractors, boys and girls, and it is something that we have to do. We need to create an army of people in this country that know how to do the trades and are true craftspeople. The definition of a true craftsperson is not somebody that does the very best work. It's somebody that does the very best work very fast and in an expedient manner. And that's what we've lost because we got rid of Oak Tech programs in this country. And we need to go back to them more and more and more, and we'll continue to do so. Now, in order to live in old buildings, we have to figure out a way to make them more energy efficient because we have to get off the grid as much as we possibly can. It's very difficult. Mr. Elefante was very eloquent last night. How many people saw that talk? Love this guy. Known him for years. He just does an incredible job. And he's one of the enlightened architects. Not all architects are enlightened. God bless their pointed heads. I work with them all the time. How many architects are in this room right now? God bless you. And there are good architects, and then there are architects who salespeople come in and give them a new product and say spec it out, and they just start speccing it out. And there are architects who take the time to be thoughtful and try to understand the nature of old buildings because they are different. They're a different animal. They were designed for airflow. They were designed for thermal mass, all the different kinds of things that we're going to talk about. This is before we go to the next shot, this is a picture of downtown Hannibal. And the people that own that whorehouse, Lulabelle's Restaurant, also have a bed and breakfast, and they live on the first floor of this building, and then above are more lofts and bed and breakfast rooms. And then we have the Java Jive, and we have all, Java Jive is the first coffee shop west of the Mississippi. Now, if you think about that for a minute, my buddy Steve Ayers and his wife Lynn own it with their daughter. And yeah, it's the first one you see when you cross the Mississippi, but you know. It's fabulous old buildings, wires running across the street. We see this in a lot of small towns all over the place. Typical of what we see. Go to the next one if you would, please, Eric. Thank you. So why retrofit for energy? Well, retrofitting old and historic buildings for energy efficiency is critical to sustain the cultural and economic health of the community. If we can't adaptively reuse and figure out how to take old buildings that were built for a certain use, then how are we going to do it? The house where my school is 8,000 square feet. It's a square, southern-style Italianate with a almost 30 by 30 belvedere on the roof. Belvedere is that room that juts out. Belvedere is loosely a term for beautiful view. And the whole Mississippi Valley is the view from it. But it was also designed specifically to allow all that hot air to go out through the roof. And so for years, people were having trouble. They were trying to massively air condition this place, and they were doing it badly. And I really am using the house as an example of tweaking to try to find the best ways to take old buildings. Next, please. In order to adaptively reuse these buildings, we've got to be able to cost-effectively retrofit them with energy-efficient systems. What does that mean? Well, sometimes cost-effectively can mean that you're going to have to spend a bunch of money here, but the payback is quick. Next, please. We can do this and retain the architectural features in the buildings. I'm going to talk also right up front about the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. Please go to the next. All right, Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation is a guideline that we use for how we approach preservation. If you're going to work with your state historic preservation office, if we're going to working with state historic preservation offices is an absolute joy for me. Some people think, oh God, you know, they're the paint police. They're going to tell me what I can and can't do. Get over yourselves. Understand that retaining the original character of your building not only will retain value in your building, but it will also make your building worth more. So, well, let's go back. A property shall be used for its historic purposes or be placed in a new use that requires minimal change to the defining characteristics of the building and its site and environment. That seems pretty straightforward. Let's decode it. This simply means that if you're going to put a building and its site into adaptive reuse, the new use should not be so extreme that it diminishes the integrity of the property. What would be an example of that? Anybody give me an example? Let's say you had a...
Lawyers are good for historic buildings, doctors aren't.
Yeah, doctors really have to put in, they change things, they put in all this equipment, those kinds of things. They're not as easily adapted to old buildings as a lawyer. A lawyer can just go into a beautiful parlor and set up his desk and some bookcases and they're in business, right? So that's a good example. Number 2, the historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved. Removal of historic materials or alteration of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided. I mean, this is common sense stuff. Decoded, don't remove historic stuff or the character defining features. For instance, plaster over brick should be kept and not removed. How many of you think that it's really cool inside of an old building to have exposed brick? Raise your hand, don't lie.
I look smart. I admit.
All right. It's a really, really bad idea. It's a bad idea because you're taking away from the thermal mass of the structure and you're exposing brick that was never intended to be exposed.
Oh, you mean removing it?
Or we see it all the time. People taking off old plaster off brick. But if you're in a warehouse that had exposed brick, you don't want to leave that exposed. That's fine. Here's a loft in downtown Hannibal where all of the plaster has been removed from the brick. And I think, and if you can, I don't know if you can tell, but there are big gaps here, and they'd have to caulk this, and the air infiltration is just massive around here. And of course, they put in cheesy replacement windows with spring balances, and I actually love the woman who did this. She's great, but she did it before I moved to Hannibal, so what can I say? Here's a 1930s movie theater. Great windows. Look at those Beaux-Art windows. With the transoms and the French door. I mean, it's just absolutely phenomenal. And the original facades, the Orpheum, it's just a great building. And here's what it looks like today. These are character-defining features. These are not the kinds of things. And this was done for energy efficiency. Forget the fact that buildings need to have ventilation. Forget the fact that you need light for human beings to feel like they're human beings instead of cave dwellers. We don't all have scabs on our knuckles anymore, right? We need ventilation, right? Original windows should be kept. Here's a building that has its original windows. It has wooden storms. Here's a building that had its windows replaced. And isn't that closed-in porch lovely? And they did that for energy efficiency. I went up and interviewed. Well, we closed in the porch because it was cold. Well, it was an open porch. What kind of Kool-Aid was this family drinking? And this is American Foursquare, fabulous house. And you can see this is Hannibal, almost like San Francisco in the neighborhood I live in. The hills are like, it's just fabulous. And it's got this really fashionable deck on the front. And it didn't add to the energy efficiency. Their heat bills didn't change. They went up a little bit. And they're like, I don't understand, Bob. Well, you did things that are not smart. Number 3, each property shall be recognized as a physical record of its time, place, and use. So changes that create a false sense of historical development, such as adding conjectural features or architectural elements from other buildings, shall not be undertaken. Decoded. Don't create a lie. Adding salvage columns where there were none is a good example of this. Not only that, but additions. And we'll get to additions here in a minute. False balconies. This building never had balconies. This is in downtown Hannibal. And they were added in 1986. And everybody thinks they're original. And they're not. That building never had them. It had really nice cast iron stonework and some elements. There's a company in Missouri called W.F. Norman. How many people have heard of that? Raise your hand. W.F. Norman is the longest continuous manufacturer of stamped tin parts, both cornices, shingles, and tin ceilings in the country. It's just south of Kansas City in Nevada, all right? And I went there for my PBS television series, and we shot the whole thing. And they still have the big canvas belts that were hooked up to steam engines. They've got electric motors now, stuff that could cut your head off if you went into it. They have these big, gigantic dies with ropes this big around. They pull them up, and they slam a piece of steel, and they let this thing drop. And I'm thinking, where's OSHA? And they say, OSHA loves us. And I'm like, cool, I'm glad. But it's fabulous, and a lot of the parts that we see on the facades of our downtown buildings and the tin ceilings were all made by W.F. Norman and are all made today, so we can replace those parts. Those are great. But when you start to add on things, then the community's collective memory by 2012 is that that's original to that building. So it created a false sense of reality and a lie. Number 4, most properties change over time. Those changes that have acquired historic significance in their own right shall be retained and preserved. This has to do a lot with additions. In 1893, we had the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, one of the largest world fairs to that point in all of history. And because the railroad system was really well in place by that time, millions of Americans went to Chicago to see this. And they saw what was called White City. And White City was a lagoon that they dredged out down by the lakefront. And they built all these classically columned buildings and white stone and all this stuff all the way around. And all these Americans that were living in Italianates and Second Empires and Greek revivals were just enamored and went home and ripped off all the Italianate porches and put on these classic columned porches and things like that. And so is that significant to the progression of the architecture of that property?
No.
Yes. Absolutely. And we've had a huge fight about this. That was such an iconic period of time in design in this country that a lot of people actually hired architects to do big wraparound porches with Tuscan columns on these Italianates. And if you had someone who was significant before that time and you were trying to take the property back to that time, it would make sense to take that porch off and go back to the original. But when you're trying to show the progression of the architecture within a community, it isn't appropriate. I hate that word. I like the word okie dokie personally. In fact, you all heard of certificates of appropriateness? We've now changed that in Hannibal to certificates of okie dokiness. So, because we use language that is off-putting to other people. We have to stop using the word appropriate. We have to stop using language that makes people feel like they're idiots. There are lots of morons in the world, but the fact of the matter is that we don't have to get up in their face and tell them that. Although I tell you that because you're my friends. Decoded. Early changes and additions that were done well show the progression of the architecture and create a sense of community values. It's good stuff. There's an example. This is a architect designed 1903 Tudor revival, very early Tudor revival in this country. And he designed the house for himself and then 10 years later put this Beaux-Art triple hung solarium on the back of it. And this was in the middle of restoration, and there's a balustrade that goes around it, and it walks out French doors from the master bedroom. So do you tear that off or do you leave it? Well, in fact, this is too important of a structure, and so we decided to keep it. So we had to make that decision. Number 5, distinctive features, finishes, and construction techniques or examples of craftsmanship that characterize a property shall be preserved. Decoded, simply don't cover, damage, or remove architectural features. Here's a great example. Look at this building. These buildings are one building away from each other. This is very fashionable, the way that they took out all the original archtop windows and did this. This is one of my friends, a couple that are friends of ours, restored the windows, exterior storms, and can you still see the divided lights? Yes, you can. People talk about not wanting to use exterior storms because they obscure the divided light windows. This is not true. This is not true. You have a responsibility, we have a responsibility as stewards of these properties to protect those original windows. They were protected originally by shutters. And then we had wooden storms. And then I have not seen a downtown party wall building that doesn't have a storm bed. Even if it never had storm windows on the outside of it, it was manufactured with a storm bed so that you could put an exterior storm on them. And we use exterior storms that have removable glass and screen panels from the inside now. They are more energy efficient that way. We just got done proving that through testing. They protect the window. Interior storms create a lot of moisture and can be real problematic unless they're perfectly sealed. There's a good company up in Minnesota called Masonry that makes really good interior storms. That are great for really high story. That building I went to today is just too high up to do exterior storms. Plus they're aluminum, original windows from the 50s. And so we have to create a thermal break, so they're going to use interior storms on those. But this particular building had a storm bed, so he was able to use exterior storms. Windows can be made fully operable, energy efficient, easily cleaned, and done in a very cost-effective way from an energy standpoint. Deteriorated historic features shall be repaired rather than replaced. Where the severity of the deterioration requires a replacement of a distinctive feature, the new feature shall match the old in design, color, texture, and other visual qualities or possible materials. Where possible materials. Where possible materials. You can get all these materials today. Anybody that sits on a historic preservation commission that says that somebody can use closed cell PVC trim on a building because you can't get wood is not doing their job and not following Secretary of the Interior standards. Secretary of the Interior standards want us to use authentic materials first and then look at alternative materials. PVC is the most toxic consumer substance ever created on this planet. That doesn't come from me. That comes from all the top environmental chemists at all of the top universities in this country. And in the 1980s at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, many people died. On one floor there was a fire. And a lot of people died in that fire, and none of them died from smoke inhalation, and none of them died from being burned. They all died from toxic off-gassing from overheated PVC. This is nasty stuff. And we're seeing this push in local historic districts for contractors to use these plastic products for columns and trim. And the fact is that they're not sustainable, and they don't last, and they won't hold up as well. And wood is what we need to be going back with, or stone, or brick, or the original elements. So where possible, materials, to me, is if something's not available. Otherwise, use the original materials. You can get salvaged wood in almost every community. Kansas City has a huge salvage operations. St. Louis does. We have them in Hannibal. How about here in Wichita? You've got one of the best salvage operations I've ever seen. This guy has got, it's unbelievable. You can get old growth wood there all day long whenever you need it for really reasonable prices. Can't get any better than that. Replacement of missing features shall be substantiated by documentary, physical, or pictorial evidence. Now, keep as much of the original material as possible is what this means. When they're deteriorated beyond repair, don't use shiny new materials that don't match. Just because it's shiny and new, we're not chimpanzees. We buy into the marketing. Don't buy into the marketing. If somebody's trying to sell you something, be very suspect. Be very suspect. People, that have been in my talk before, listen, I am not a contractor. I'm a developer. So you can't hire me to do anything. So if I tell you that this is the best way to do it, it's because for 40 years I've seen how it works, and I've studied all the science. I also don't take any free products from anybody. Number 7, chemical or physical treatments. This is really important, such as sandblasting that cause damage to historical materials shall not be used. Surface cleaning of structures, if appropriate, should be undertaken using the gentlest means possible. When I clean stone and brick, the first thing I try is a little bit of Dawn in hot water and a scrub brush. I don't want to, listen, if you don't like historic buildings and you want them to look shiny and new, go buy a vinyl house in the burbs. Seriously. I mean, old houses, old buildings have character. Sometimes we get dirt on them that can be deleterious to the structure, and from old factory emissions and carbon and that kind of thing. And there's all kinds of treatments that are appropriate for that. And guys like John Spiewak, raise your hand, John. I keep referring to John because he's the masonry guru here. Can be done to fix that. So don't do no harm. That's what we say. That is what preservation is specifically. For instance, power washing above 900 pounds per square inch can ruin historic brick, wood, and stone. And that's just a fact. We know that acid washing repointed brick or stone is detrimental to masonry units as well. It eats into the French bread crust of the brick. It's like a piece of French bread. You don't want to mess with the firing on the outside of the brick. Significant architectural feature resources affected by a project shall be protected and preserved. If such resources must be disturbed, mitigation requirements should be undertaken. So one of my favorites are these outhouse archaeologists, right? That are roaming throughout the whole Midwest, and they want to come in and dig up your outhouses. And we'll share whatever we find with you. Whatever, right? That's not good mitigation. That's not taking care of the site. If you've got an Indian mound there, you've got an issue, and you've got to deal with it. And so we need to be respectful of those types of things. If you find anything that resembles an archaeological site, call your SHPO, and they'll come and brainstorm with you. They're your friends. They're your collaborators. They want to work with you. And I find that I work with SHPOs all over the country, and they are the State Historic Preservation officers. They're fantastic people that really are passionate about preservation. So here is something that's getting ready. This is drilling in the side yard. I actually hired an archaeologist to come up and look at the yard and probe and do everything that before we started drilling for geothermal to make sure we were in good shape. And we didn't have anything. New additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction shall not destroy historic material. Basically, the new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with massing, size, and scale architectural features to protect the historic integrity of the property and its environment. This is very controversial. I don't know why. It shouldn't be. But we have a responsibility as the stewards of these old houses not to create a lie. So if I'm putting in an addition, additions are okay in old houses. Times change. And if you're going to place an addition on the back so that it's not ruining the look of the front of the house, you want to set it back and make it obvious that it is an addition, but you want to pick up massing and detailing so it doesn't look like the mothership alien guys landed it on the back. And we see that kind of thing all the time. This is a good example of a connection between a new and old building, and that's right here in Wichita. And I show this all over the country because it was done well. It respects the architecture of the original building, and the new building picks up massing and detailing, but it is obvious that it's new, and the connection between the two doesn't try to tell you something that it's not. And I think that's a lovely example of how to do it right. Here's an example of how not to do it right. This is a really bad little garage. Now, it was well-intentioned, but it doesn't really pull off what they were trying to do, and it obscures the side of the house, which is highly visible from the street, because this is the front of the house. It creates a problem. New additions and adjacent or related construction shall be undertaken in such a manner that if removed in the future, the form and integrity of the historic property and its environment would be unimpaired. Don't attach something in a way that you have to remove original material. So if I'm building an addition and I've got this great coping around the bottom of the house that I'm putting it onto, or I've got some bracket work, I'm going to cope the work that I'm doing around it so that I don't tear it off. If I have to take an element off, I'm going to very, very carefully mark it and document it and put it into a box up in the attic so that in the future it can be put back. It's like, you ever watch these car auction shows? Don't lie, I know you do. I watch them all the time. And there's a big debate in car restoration, and my attitude is that it should be original as much as possible. And if you're going to take something out and put in a new carburetor, they put the old one in the trunk and it's in a box, so when whoever buys it can put it back on if they want to. It's the same kind of thinking with historic preservation. So don't attach anything that can't be removed safely later. When considering energy retrofits, it's critical to first have the structure analyzed for its current energy footprint. To start with, have an energy audit, which includes blower door testing, infrared testing, and be sure to have an analysis of the existing HVAC system. Now, this is really interesting. Oftentimes, especially in commercial buildings, people will go in and old houses, and they'll see it. Like, let's take a small story-and-a-half house, and there's an octopus furnace down in the basement. How many people know what an octopus furnace is, right? They had big, gigantic ducts, and they were coal-fed originally, and then usually gas was put to them in a blower fan, and they're lined with bricks, and they're heavy-gauge steel, and they're the best dang furnaces in the world. They're really efficient. Huh? You bet. They're the best insulation in the world, you know. I mean, yeah. Right, and you can encapsulate that so it's not friable if it's loose, and it's gravity fed unless you put a blower fan on it, and once it turns off, the brick or the steel retains the heat and it keeps putting heat out. So is that a furnace you want to get rid of? Here's the problem. The problem is that the consumers in the world buy into, well, if I don't have one of these side vent high efficiency furnaces or what have you, then I and building inspectors. Oh my God! Anybody here a building inspector? Okay, a lot of building inspectors will see this and go, oh, you got to get rid of that. Well, I don't agree, and because you have to look at the payback, right? So if you're going to take out that. You got a story and a half house, and you want to have air conditioning. You got a couple window air conditioners as high efficiency as you can afford to buy, and that does a good job cooling a small house. And you've got this old octopus furnace that's just doing its job just great. Why spend the money on something that you don't need to have? It's just it's not just houses; it's also buildings. We find old boiler systems in buildings, and about 30% of the time of the buildings that I restore everything from, as a developer, from single-family homes to 100,000 square foot high schools into loft condominiums. About 30% of the time we go in the boiler systems and the whole heating system, I have it inspected, and the guy goes, man, if you replace this, you'll never get this place to heat right, and you can do downdraft air conditioning systems elsewhere, you should keep this boiler. And 70% of the time we need to replace it. But unless I get an engineer, a mechanical engineer, to come in and look at it, I'm not talking about the local HVAC guy. There are many ethical ones, but their job is to switch out and put in new equipment. You need an independent third party to come in and help you analyze that building. Blower door testing will tell you where all the leaks are in your building. And air infiltration is a huge deal. And so that's really good. And infrared photography will also show you a lot about where you need to plug up your building. Now, this is the Department of Energy's. Space heating is 31%. Space cooling takes 12% of your energy. Water heating, lighting, computers, appliances, refrigeration, and other. Now, this is interesting. Now, floor and ceiling lights, ductwork, these are places where energy can escape. And windows, 10%. And that's on the high end. We're finding 5 to 10% of the footprint of any building is our windows. And so you really have to step back for a minute and make a decision as to whether it's worth doing a little weather stripping and putting a good storm on, or you want to spend a bunch of money where the average payback's 40 years. The average payback in a retrofit for weather stripping and a storm is 4 to 6 years. Payback means how much energy you save so that you can pay for what you just did. Payback is a big deal. Air infiltration, excessive air infiltration is one of the primary energy loss aspects in historic buildings. Straight up. Stopping this is cost effective, and as such will deliver the biggest payback available. Air infiltration is a big deal. You stop the air infiltration, not all of it, you need a transfer of air in buildings. Children are getting sicker, more asthma. We have more interior building illnesses because people are living in shut-up buildings and they are not using their windows and they are not having the screen door that my grandma used to have in Manhattan, Kansas. We go the brick streets. I'll never forget. They were going to come in and cover up the brick streets, and she was just livid. I said, "Why, Grandma?" And she said, "My grandma Yapp was 6'4". Wow. And, she was a giant. And why, Grandma? And she said, because I can't hear the cars coming down the street if they get rid of the brick streets. I want to know when they're coming, so the kids I don't want them getting run over. I thought, well, that's brilliant. I like that. Plus, it keeps people going slower through neighborhoods, Typically, windows comprise 15% of them at the most is the highest I've ever seen. We just got done testing all these old windows that we restored and weather stripped in Pine Mountain, Kentucky, and the footprint of that building through all the data and all the testing and all the analysis was about 9.2% of that entire structure. It was a frame structure with double hung windows and Hope steel casement windows. So it's just not as big a deal as you think. And save 40% on energy. That's a lie. When they tell you that and they're trying to sell you windows and tell you you're going to save 40% on energy, it's just a lie. There's no truth to it whatsoever. What we discovered in Pine Mountain is that an old window has less air infiltration than almost all residential replacement windows. And the window industry, since we hired the same guy that tests windows for the window companies, so the window companies couldn't jump on us and say we hired the wrong guy. Oh no, you hired our guy. Okay, Bob. He said that the air infiltration testing is never marketed for replacement windows, commercial or residential, because it's so bad on new windows. They don't ever market to it. And we proved that old windows were almost virtually no air infiltration, actually. So the two primary questions with any window are what is the U value and air infiltration. U value is how much energy transfers through 1 square foot of that window in 1 hour. Now, in the window industry, only tests the center of the window pane, the double pane windows. We test every square foot of the window opening. because there's air infiltration that can come from the casing outside and around through the sides of the windows and underneath the skirts and all those kinds of things. So we're testing for U value around the entire window opening, and we're averaging, when we get done with the storm window, about a 0.35 U value. Now, U values are better the lower they are. R values, whenever the window industry talks about R values, and this is really Energy Star and the Department of Energy's problem. You talk to the experts at Berkeley Labs, they'll all agree with me about this, that R value is an insulative quality that the insulation industry came up with as a way to rate their products, and trying to transfer that over to windows is crazy. An R value on a window is just stupid. Glass conducts heat and cold. I don't care how many layers of glass you have. An R8 on a window is an absolute scam on you. It doesn't help you in any way, shape, or form. Glass is there for ventilation and light. That's what it's there for. And whenever we make our windows inoperable, we're making our houses unhealthy. We need to be able, we can save 12 to 15% on air conditioning costs in an old house if you have windows that operate. Top sash drops 3 inches, bottom sash comes up 3 inches. Hot air and humidity blows out the top gap, and cool breezes come in through the bottom. And infrared photography has shown this. It's just fascinating. It looks like a vortex around the window. That's what a double hung window was designed to do. It was designed as an air conditioning system. That was its only purpose in life. And we think sometime in the 1400s it was invented in England. But we're still trying to figure that out exactly. So U values are a calculation of how much energy passes through a 1 square foot area of the window in 1 hour. Now, this is an interesting graph that was done by the Collingswood Historic District Commission, which I think is in Ohio. And it shows, here's an old window with no storm. It's a 1.10 U value. Now, they went and bought a cheesy $50 storm, which is, you know, the kind that break off your fingernails when you try to put it on and everything, and they put it on there, and they got a 0.50 U value, and they did nothing to the window sashes. No tracks, no rubber seals, no weather stripping whatsoever. They got a 0.50 U value. Here's a brand new thermal pane vinyl window installed, has a 0.58. The higher, the worse, the lower, the better. You put a storm on an old window, and it's more energy efficient right at the moment you put it on than a replacement double pane vinyl window, Pella window, Anderson window, any window. It's just astonishing. So this is the average. Now, some windows have come down in their U values a little bit. They can add some low E type of glass, low E double pane thermal replacement window, has 0.35, which is about what we're getting out of the windows that we're doing, restoring with storms and everything. But look at the paybacks. This is interesting. 4.5 years to do that, 40.5 years to do that, 34 to do this, and 240 years. And I know when I saw that, I went, no way. Then I took this calculator that architects and other people use, and I went through it, and by golly, it's true. The average payback on a commercial replacement window is over 100 years. The average payback on a replacement disposable window, because that's what they are, they're disposable windows. They have an average lifespan of 15 years before they go to the dump, is 40 years. That was published in the Old House Journal. Yeah, and which is a great magazine. How many people have heard of the Old House Journal? It's not this Old House magazine. That's a rag. This is the Old House Journal. And the Old House Journal, when I first started out in the business, and I bought my first house when I was 17, somebody sent me these 3-hole punched 8-page newsletters by some guy named Clem Labine and doing brownstones.
Like Pat Poor?
Well, Pat Poor wasn't even around at the time. It was Clem. And Clem's retired now. Well, sort of. I don't think he'll ever retire. But he's an interesting guy. Great magazine.
All of those if anybody wants to see them.
Yeah, I have all those old ones in a 3-ring binder. So this is really interesting. I mean, they calculated BTUs. They did a really good job on this. And this has been scrutinized by the window industry, and they can't dispute it. So I think that's really interesting, and I told other people this the other day, earlier today. But you know, Charles Cumpson with Glass Magazine, the inside trade magazine for the window industry, said that we're satisfied knowing that a replacement window has a 15-year life. If the consumer knew it, we'd be in trouble. Now, he wrote that in his editorial in this magazine, and within by the next time the magazine came out, Charles Cumpson wasn't working for that magazine, that trade association anymore. Ted Hart, a couple years before that, said that with full knowledge to build a good window, we choose to make cheesy insulated glass units that don't last. It's criminal that we do this with full knowledge how to build a good window. And he never wrote for that magazine again. So it's interesting that the people that are inside the industry know that this is all just a way to spend a bunch of money that you don't need to spend. This is, in Missouri, our SHPO gives us this calculator. So here we have, we're entering, the existing window had a 0.44 U value. And then we entered in all these different calculations. And this is for an extruded high-tech aluminum with separations for thermal breaks and all this, aluminum replacement window, double hung window. And we calculated it all out and what it would cost, and the payback was 204.08 years, and it would have cost $1,600 in opening. The restoration of the window would have cost about $800. Half the money, and the payback would have been about 4 years. So no matter how I look at this, no matter where I go, when I look at the objective information, it's always the same. Old windows outperform new windows all day long, and it's science. It's not conjecture, it's science. Because if we don't talk about the science, we'll never win the battle. So $20 and $60 worth of, or $60 worth of weather stripping and a $400 wood exterior storm. This is on the commercial window, okay? With low E glass, you can expect the U value to go from a 0.44 to a 0.34 to 0.40. That's pretty good. Now, low E glass is problematic. Low E glass on historic buildings gives the building either a dark look or a mirror look on the window. So we do not use it much, very sparingly. There's a low E spray-on coating that's less obtrusive, that works pretty well. But 1/4 inch laminated glass that's in the side windows of your car will give you approaching the same U value as an insulated glass window. It has 99.7% UV protection with no low E coatings. It's more soundproof in an urban environment, and it's safety glass, so it won't shatter. And we use it in storm windows a lot because I don't want that look of the low E coating. And in residential properties, what we're finding is that the sun is shining on low E replacement disposable windows and reflecting back and melting the vinyl siding on the house next door. We're seeing this all over the country. This is really fascinating.
Say that again about the 1/4 inch glass.
1/4 inch laminated glass. My friend John Seekircher out in New York City, who restores steel casement windows. An architect buddy of ours named Walter Sedevac in New York is actually doing all of the analysis of the data on all the testing of windows that we're doing that I've been mentioning through the day. And he wrote back in the late 90s a paper about 1/4 inch laminated glass being, because of the mylar film in between, creates a thermal break. And it isn't the same U value, but it's approaching it. And it's safety glass, so it doesn't shatter. It's more soundproof than insulated double pane glass. It's 1/3 cheaper than insulated glass. And you can have it custom cut in any glass shop all day long. It's better to retrofit that into an old commercial wood sash than to try to retrofit an old wood sash in a commercial building with insulated glass, because you have to route out a commercial sash so deeply to get that big insulated glass unit in it that it hurts the mortise and tenon joints that hold the window together. So what we're seeing now, 10, 15, 20 years after all these retrofits of commercial wood buildings, is that the ones that were retrofitted with insulated glass, the sashes are falling apart because the tenons have been breached in such a way. Those are the joints that hold the sashes together on the corners. This is only a 1/4 inch thick, and a lot of commercial sashes had 1/4 inch plate glass in them anyway. And so it's a really good alternative. John Seekircher retrofitted all of Frank Lloyd Wright's falling water with 1/4 inch lam and reduced their energy footprint by 30% by doing it in the steel Hopes casement windows. And by the way, a lot of people whine about steel casement windows in old buildings and Tudor houses. We did the same testing on those in the same building, and they tested out with an interior storm just as much as a wood window. Almost the best testing for air infiltration, the least came through the steel casement window.
One more question. What about the use of those in a high-quality storm, an unobtrusive one?
Yes. I use storm windows on everything I do. And I use quarter-inch lam in the storms a lot because it gives me that UV protection on the exterior. It protects the window sash, the most precious thing that I want to save. And everybody that says, well, it obscures the divided lights, the true divided lights, I'm going to show you a picture where it's wrong. And I'm getting glass that is non-reflective. I've got a really good little glass shop in Hannibal that will order me all this stuff. It's a hair more expensive, about 10% more. Museums use it a lot. I'm on the board of directors of the Mark Twain Museum in Hannibal, and so I did some research on this because we were doing it for cases where we were showing different things, and found that you can get quarter-inch laminated low reflection glass.
Plus, it does another thing. It's safety glass.
Yeah, it's safety glass. And it's more soundproof. And in urban environments, that can be a really big deal. Total restoration to safely remove old lead paint and putty as well as adding new weather stripping should run between $750 and $1,200 for a commercial and $400 to $700 for a residential window, including storm. And the people that I train, and some people will argue with me about this. They'll say, well, it's going to cost more, Bob. Some window companies, men and women. Women are way better at preservation trades than men, by the way. So get over yourselves, guys. The girls in my high school class are far better, and I'm constantly pitting the boys against them because the boys just can't stand the fact that the girls are better than they are, so it makes the boys work harder. I said this in an earlier class, but I'll say it again. A craftsperson is not just someone who does good work, it's someone who does good work really fast. And that's what we need to learn how to do in our business, is be more expedient about how we do things, thinking 40 steps ahead. Every time one hand is in motion, the other hand's in motion, getting ready to get something else done. It's a way of thinking. It's how I was trained in my German apprenticeship as a furniture maker. He was but he taught me. And so, I can take two double-hung wood sashes, pull them out of their openings, get them on the bench, safely remove all the lead and paint from both sides, including the interior side with the molded profile, in less than a half an hour. Now, I would say that most of my students, I don't know, Eric's one of my students. He's like, I don't know, Bob. Eric's a restoration contractor here in town, so. But we need to get this is what I can do it for. If I was a contractor and I could make a really nice profit of between 12 and 15% on each window at these prices. The U.S. Department of Energy says window awnings can reduce solar gain in the summer up to 65% on south-facing windows and 77% on west-facing windows. Awnings are an issue. Some preservation commissions don't want you to put awnings on your house or your building. I don't understand why. They have a historical context. They were used especially in downtown party wall buildings all over the place. And while every building is different and orientation to the sun varies, awnings can potentially save 10 to 25% on energy costs. Now I'm talking about operable awnings. Here's a picture from the 1860s in Hannibal. And you can see the operable awning above that window. Here's another picture of the Java Jive in downtown Hannibal right now. These are operable canvas awnings that Steve and Lynn roll up when the sun, and when the sun's out, they put them back down. And it saves on their air conditioning costs. I mean, it's just common sense. Masonry. Masonry is very important. How many people have heard the term tuck pointing? All right, that's wrong, right? That there's no such, well, there is such thing as tuck pointing, but it has to do with working class people in England wanting to have real thin butter joints like the rich people and pointing in a little line in the mortar. This is called, what needed to be done here is repointing. But this is from a lack of maintenance in a downtown building, water constantly coming out of the gutters here. You can see where the brick is cracked. There's been some really inappropriate bad mortar done in different spots up in here that have caused all kinds of problems. But having your building pointed well is important. and caulked well so that you don't have air infiltration. The idea in insulating your building, the idea is to make the building as energy efficient as possible while doing no harm to the structural and architectural elements. Here is a bad example of a brick building where they built the wall out and stuffed a bunch of fiberglass insulation in there. And what they did is they actually took away from the thermal mass, the thermal mass being the brick. Now, it kind of depends. On a freestanding building, its effect doesn't last as long. But on a party wall building where you're sharing walls with each other, what would be the point of insulating the walls between the rooms, or even the storefronts, to be for that matter? You've got a lot of glass on the storefronts of these buildings. You've got in residential buildings, you have brick that retains the heat after the heating season starts up a while, and then you start to lose some of that effectiveness as it gets really cold outside. Same thing with cooling. When you take away that thermal mass, you're actually making it harder. Here's a place that you want to go down into your basement. This is your foundation. Your joists are sitting on top of the foundation. You want to caulk and insulate in those areas. That's a massive area of air infiltration. Make sure that your stone is well pointed with appropriate lime-based mortar. This is where somebody pooped on a ceiling. All right. This is typical. I'm seeing this everywhere I go. They're taking this soy foam and closed cell and open cell foam and spraying it into the joists. It actually does harm because it's hard to get it off. But here's the worst problem. The worst problem is this is the roof. And if that roof leaks or condensation gets up there, the water is pooling up above this foam insulation. You don't even know it. It's rotting the structural members in the roof and causing all kinds of problems. So this blown-in foam stuff is not a good way to do it.
Is that a restaurant?
That's a loft apartment, yeah. So I'm not a big fan of insulation. I don't blow insulation into the sidewalls of any historic house that I work on. There's no payback, and all it's going to do is cause moisture problems as the warm, moist air migrates into the wall from the inside the building. In 80% of the houses we open up, it's a wet mass at the bottom. It sends out a no RSVP invitation to all the termites and carpenter ants to come party in the wall, and the sill plates have rot and all kinds of problems. So if it costs you $6,000 to insulate, have somebody come in and blow insulation into your house, and the payback is 40 to 60 years, we call that no payback. You're not going to save enough energy, and that's taking into that no damage happens. But it does in most of the properties we see. No, you want to put insulation in the attic. Yeah, a building is like a chimney. A building is like a chimney. They would have been better off in this particular case not to blow insulation into the rafters of that, but to put insulation, to put a ceiling up against there and just put insulation up into that space, whether it's cotton insulation or fiberglass or what have you. If there was a leak in the roof, they would find out quickly, and they would still get the R that they're looking for, which is an R38 sometimes in attics in our climate. Yeah, you want to have I like loose fill insulation in the attics of residential houses. You can pick cellulose and or fiberglass. Fiberglass, I'm sure, will be outlawed by the EPA soon. So, but cellulose.
Why do you say that?
Oh, because of the fibers. They'll find some reason to tell.
Asbestos,
Yeah.
you inhale it and ingest it to the body doesn't realize
It stays in your lungs.
Well, I understand that, but I work for a refinery, and I cut that stuff with a handsaw, and it was flying all over the place. That was 30 years ago.
Well, I wondered what your problem
I know.
was.
It would be a lung problem. But I understand that, but
R38.
I kind of draw the line. When they outlawed charcoal because it caused cancer, I still barbecue.
Yeah.
I mean,
Listen, a lot of people grew up and lived to be in their 70s and 80s. I've been around asbestos, lead,
be careful with it, but
coal dust, everything you can think of. Yeah.
What do you do on insulated walls?
I don't insulate walls in old houses or old buildings, ever.
the dead air space that they created in those walls, that was the insulation.
There's an insulated quality to a dead air space. Otherwise, the window industry wouldn't have insulated glass, right?
Well, I think
John, on brick buildings and existing brick buildings with plaster walls, when they put insulation into those wall cavities, what kind of havoc does it play on the masonry?
Well, it changes the dew point. There's a dew point inside the wall cavity, especially when the temperature on the outside of the building is
20 or 30% different than the inside temperature. When they're pumping out the air conditioning on the inside and it's really hot on the outside, there's a dew point on the inside that creates even salts that can come through the brick masonry and through the wall. And we even had in our LinkedIn group just recently this argument going on about people trying to seal brick on the inside of a loft area, that they like the look of the brick and that they don't like the crumbs that are on the back of their couch. And so the practical experts were basically saying, well, it needs to be plastered because it was originally plastered there or lime washed or consolidated in some way. But the insulation doesn't actually serve any purpose because all the heat actually raises up and goes in through the ceiling.
That's right. Buildings are like chimneys. The heat is rising up through the buildings. And so you want to insulate your attic. Make sure you've got some ventilation in your eaves so that you're not blocking off your eaves. They say the 1 in 150 rule in new construction, right? Anybody heard that? Ever heard that? For every 150 square feet of attic floor space, you're supposed to have 1 square foot of net-free ventilation in the roof. Well, in these super insulated houses, you better have some ventilation or you're going to be in trouble. But old buildings and old houses, that rule is way over the top. 1 in 300 is the max that I like to see. And you know those cheesy looking roof vents? They're about 1/2 square foot of net-free ventilation. My God, if you've got an 800 or 900 square foot attic, you're going to have those stupid looking roof vents everywhere. Ridge vents are a good way to go. I generally don't put vents in my unheated attic spaces at all in my roofs, and my roofs last for 25, 30 years if they're not wood. And if they're wood, they last for 60 to 70 years. I put cedar shingle roofs back on every house that I do that had cedar shingle roofs. Now I buy #1 blue label. They're quarter sawn Hart cedar shingles that come from older growth Canadian lumber companies, and you know I've got roofs that I put on 38, 40 years ago that are still doing their job, and we don't lay them over sheeting ever. You put plywood sheeting on a roof or even tar paper, and you got a 15-year roof. The idea of those space boards up in your attic that you see those spaces between is to get airflow between that so it can dry out from underneath and on top, and you can get a good roof out of it. Right. That's right. And we need a little ventilation. Yeah, John.
There's one other thing that it goes with this is that we've put a lot of expectation on our architecture to create demands on our architecture to create environments for us to be comfortable in, as opposed to putting a sweater on when it gets a little bit more cooler in the room. In fact, before forced air heating, when they heat buildings with fireplaces, if they sealed up buildings like we seal up today, all the fireplaces would go out. They would never be able to have a fireplace actually ignite because there'd be no air for them to actually flow. So the amount of smoke that you see come out of a historic building is the amount of air that's being drawn into it through the crack. Actually, that's why some of the doors in some of the historic buildings that used to be heated by fireplaces, the doors are cut short on the floors so the air could go through there.
Every door in my house was cut short. When we bought my house, it had never had central heat. It had little cheesy gas heaters cut into the walls and window air conditioners, and it was running $1,600 to $1,800 a month to heat and air condition that structure. And there are 8 fireplaces in it, and they were coal fireplaces, and the house was heated with coal. And so we've changed the whole nature of it. So I have to be very cognizant of how that house worked as we do all the different things that we're doing to make it a little more energy efficient, but also respect the architecture and understand that all of my plaster walls are on 2x2 furring strips, not plaster on brick. This was in 1859. That was pretty smart of this guy, whoever built this house. It gave that little air, that little thermal break, that little air gap in between the studs. And everybody's like, well, you got to put insulation? I'm not putting insulation in there. It's a waste of my money. It's a waste of my time. I want to spend my time stopping excessive air infiltration. I want to stop the chimney from going out in the winter time. I don't want to lose that heat, but I want that heat to go out in the summertime. So that Belvedere is the greatest thing that was ever invented on a house. Cupolas and barns. The reason they have cupolas is to get the heat out of the dang barn. And so we have to remember why they did things the way they did. I mean, literally, and Elefante said it last night, I mean, we have literally forgotten more in the last 100 years than we've learned. And it's really...
People get rid of their whole house fans, their attic.
Yeah, I mean, that's just craziness, right? Yeah.
There was something you said a minute ago about non-ventilated attics. You know, but I'm not sure everybody caught that, and some people have made a giant leap in modern construction saying, well, if we didn't need them then, we don't need them now, which is a giant mistake, because if you build according to our construction techniques and methods today, and you don't put some type of ventilation in the attic, wow.
Well, most of these houses are so super insulated that they have to have a mechanical way to get an exchange of air. I've testified in, I don't know, 3 or 4 court cases on mold. They put in an air exchanger, and the motor went out, and the homeowners didn't know anything about it, and their kids were getting sick, and there was mold all over the houses, and they made the house so dang tight that you couldn't even breathe in it. It's just nuts. You're absolutely right. That's a good point.
Plus, you know, the condensation gathers on the underside of the roof.
Right. It goes back to what I was saying before. You know, people moved out to the burbs. The people that stayed behind wanted to be like the burbs. They closed in their porches. They started to hang out in the backyards. They couldn't see what was going on in their neighborhoods. They started to try to change the nature of their old house and try to make it modern, like the people that left their neighborhood. And they aren't modern. And the shiny and new just doesn't have a place. Mechanical systems have the existing air conditioning systems inspected. Use a mechanical engineer. I really believe that a mechanical engineer is important. I hired a mechanical engineer to help me design the geothermal system that we put in the school. And even afterwards, we had some issues, and he came back out, and we did a lot of investigating. I'm trying to use the house as a laboratory for how to take a big, gigantic robber baron mansion and make it energy efficient and comfortable and cost effective. And I'll probably be tweaking it for the next 20 years to get it done. But there's your octopus. I love that. I think that's a fabulous thing right there. Look at that boiler. That's an amazing thing. Boiler technology has improved a lot. But sometimes a mechanical engineer can come in and look at a boiler and go, it looks ugly, folks, but she's operating well, and I wouldn't get rid of her until she goes out. And sometimes that's really a smart thing to do. Radiators, I love radiator heat. How many people have radiator heat in their houses? You know, the boiler shuts off, the radiator keeps putting it out. It depends on whether you're steam or hot water. The steam systems cool down immediately. The hot water systems are enclosed, and so the piping actually survives longer in a hot water system because, in theory, there's no air in the pipes. Steam is a very dirty type of, depends on pitches of pipes and air mixing in with the water, and so they tend to be a little dirtier, but they're still fairly efficient systems. You just have to drain the sludge out of them, and it's a little bit more work than a hot water system. But hot water systems are also very adaptable to all different kinds of high efficiency types of things. This is what we call a high pressure, high velocity ductwork system. It's about the size of a shop vac hose, and there are basically 2 companies that make them. One is Space Pack and the other one is Unico. And the theory is that they're almost like a porthole in a speaker is what the vent looks like. And in theory, it pushes the air into the room at such a high velocity that every square foot of the room is the same temperature, which is not the case in a lot of old buildings with really high ceilings. Fans can be a really good thing for old buildings. We're getting a little bit more high efficiency here as time goes on. This is a conventional hot water heater, and they run about 82% efficiency. If you've got one in there and you want to try to go to a 90 plus, you're not going to get a payback in doing that for a long, long time. So you're probably better off waiting until this one goes out. This is called a Munchkin. Munchkins are German. They're the most high efficient hot water boilers on the market today. They are the size of that case right there. And they will do a 3,000 square foot house. They're pretty amazing. They side vent, so you don't have to chimney vent them. And they are a great little retrofit for a lot of historic houses, and they've been around now for about 20 years, and they're doing their job. So I have this 20-year rule. If it's been around for 20 years and it's still functioning and doing its job, then I'll start to talk about it. Otherwise, I don't. These are the portholes for the high pressure, high velocity system that you see. This is a really tall area in a part of a church, and so it can be a really good system. Geothermal. Geothermal is a really interesting, basically invented at the University of Oklahoma, as we know it today. And it takes the ground temperature. In Hannibal, it runs about 52 degrees year-round. I know that because when we go into the Mark Twain cave in January, it's 52 degrees in the cave, and so there's two different ways that you can do it. One is what we call a lateral system. If you have a lot of acreage, you can dig down 8 feet below the ground and run, loop it through the entire acreage. I live in an urban environment. We have 10 200-foot deep wells that were drilled by this rig, which looks like Larry and Moe, and they were kind of like Larry and Moe, but they do a lot of drilling. And we did 200-foot deep. They say 1 well per ton, and the well depths are about 150 feet. We went ahead and went 200, and we hit an underground river the last 50 feet. So our piping is surrounded by, at least we thought it was, surrounded by cold water year-round. Well, what we found out is that underground river dries out. So that last 50 feet is not doing much for us. We went an extra 50 feet thinking it might, but it ended up not doing a lot for us half the year, and the other half of the year is fine. It's really running strong in the winter, which is when we need it the most, and in the summer. Air conditioning is virtually free with this system, and the heating runs us somewhere in the $450 to $650 a month range, but air conditioning runs us about $75 to $150 a month for 8,000 square feet. This is the piping that they use. It's the same high pressure piping they use for gas lines that they're putting in and bringing into homes now. And it comes in from the ground. They looped all the wells together, and then it comes in and up into the rafters and comes over to the first air handler here. And then we have another one on the 3rd floor that does the Belvedere, the 3rd floor, and the 2nd floor. And then we have one that does the woodworking studio. That's a walkout basement, and the 1st floor. And then we have it all zoned. The house is in 4 separate zones. There are 4 separate thermostats throughout the house so that we can control the temperature based on what's going on in any given room. So the idea for the school, we're buying up all the properties around us so that we can create kind of a campus. My goal is to make it a 2-year associate degree program in historic preservation trade someday, but I've got to have a campus to do that. And so we're turning the house into a bed and breakfast, and so we need to be able to zone it out so that when we don't have guests, we don't have to have it cranked up all the way. This is an example of what not to do. This just makes me absolutely nuts. My friends who did this building originally built boxes underneath the windows and ran all the ductwork underneath the windows. And this guy bought this building 6 months ago and took all those boxes out and put this ductwork up in here. This is so inefficient, it's unbelievable. It looks really cool. It's a spiral ductwork. You see it in lofty type places all the time. But this is a Chicago-style department store, and it just looks stupid. Look at these wonderful columns. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. These fans make sense. There have been fans there since the building was built, but to take the ductwork out of an insulated space where it was underneath the windows where it belongs and put it up into the air like that is just absolutely, and his energy costs have gone up 2/3 since he did this. He did this on each of the 3 floors of the building.
Why would he have done that?
Because he thought it was groovy and cool to have spiral ductwork in that building. He didn't ask anybody else.
So he didn't have an engineer?
No, he didn't have an engineer. He thinks he knows everything, and I can't talk to him, Of course, I'm so warm and fuzzy, so, The Lammunger House is the school that I've been talking about, built in 1859. This is the original photograph of the house when it was built, and this is the house today.
That's your house.
Uh-huh.
So cool.
This porch was torn off in the 30s. We are reconstructing it. We have paint lines that show the brackets. We have one original porch on the other side. We have sandborn maps that establish when the porch was torn off. We have, and so we didn't do anything conjectural. This is a painting, and so even blowing it up, we saw certain things that were there, and we saw the shadow lines in the paint line because the building's always been painted. And so we've reconstructed this porch to the exact, we found where the original footings were, we probed down, so we got the dimension of the porch just right, and I think that the sawn balusters here that we put in are probably fancier, and we're just now getting ready in the spring to put the balustrade up here. This is a walkout window. These windows here all pocket up into the brick wall so you can walk directly out into the patios on either side and onto the porch. Every room in the house has a pocket window that pockets up into the upper story so you can walk out onto the balconies as well. It's very cool. It's very cool. And, but I didn't want to make the porch a lie. I did what I knew was there, and I didn't go any further. I picked up massing and detailing, had a really good painting, but I didn't want to create a lie. So the house is 7,950 square feet. It's on a corner lot. It has one party wall in the south. The reason it has a party wall in the south is because the original slave house is attached to the back. It's a Greek revival house. Mr. Lamb they all came from Kentucky. It was the biggest land scam in American history. The big earthquake that happened just after the turn of the 19th century that made the Mississippi flow north. All these northwestern Kentucky boys went to the federal government and said it ruined our land. It's all just big craters. You got to give us new land. Gave them all of northeast Missouri, and they founded Hannibal and Palmyra, and they started, creating their fortunes. And their families still farm all that land in Kentucky. It never was hurt. There was nothing wrong with it. And but they brought their slaves with them. Hannibal had the highest number of slaves per capita of any city in the country. It was almost 40% African American before the Civil War, and they were all slaves. I'm from Iowa, just north of there, and this is, of course I knew this, but it really blew my mind. At first I'm thinking, do I want to buy a house where the guy had slaves? And then I thought, well, it's part of the history, it's all right. It's solid 3 brick thick, stone foundation, framed hip roof. Window restoration, $350 each times 42, $14,700. Insulation, weather stripping, plugging, air infiltration, $3,750. The cost of the geothermal system after the 30% federal tax credit was $29,400. The total energy retrofit costs $47,850. Original gas and electric was running $19,450 a year, down to $6,900. Gas and electric annual savings, $12,492. Payback 3.83 years. That's a payback, folks. That pays back. That's what makes things work. That's what makes energy efficiency a happening thing in historic properties.
Now, you said you're making money on these houses.
Well, this is my house.
I understand that, but when you show that much of increase in efficiency, how much do they increase the value of the houses?
A lot. Because when somebody's going to buy a big old historic house and they know that their average utility bill is going to be $250 a month for a 4,000 square foot house, they're going to be a lot more interested in buying that house than they are. And listen, part of this is attracting people back to these central city neighborhoods. We cannot live in museums. We have to respect the architecture. But in fact, in every single family home, and most of them have been abandoned for years that I do, and most of them have been chopped up by slumlords, one of our biggest problems in central city neighborhoods. And I put in, if there's a maid's room on the second floor, I turn it into a second floor laundry, or a master bathroom, or a walk-in closet. These are the kinds of things that people want. We still use the same trim. We use hardwood floors. We do all kinds of things. We put in master bathrooms. We make master suites. We put in carriage houses with garages if there aren't any, so that we can start attracting people back to the central city. They're going to get some of the things that they expect in an old house, but we're going to give it to them with all the original features and something that's energy efficient that can work today. And my houses sell before I ever get them done. Every house I do, and I'm not a flipper. My projects take anywhere from a year to a year and a half to do with a big crew of subs that I use. And when I get them done, they're sold already. The high school kid's house that they're doing, this 1844 Greek revival that Mark Twain's father held court in because he was a judge in Hannibal and used to throw all the drunks in jail from this house. Well, it looks like it's already sold. And it's a little tiny house. It's 1,400 square feet, and in Hannibal, it'll sell for $150,000 when it's done. And the kids will have a total of $90,000 in it. I went back and calculated all 162 projects that I've done since I was 17 years old. I didn't have as good a data on some of the early ones, so I had to guess on some of that. But the average cost per square foot, including acquisition of the properties that I'm doing, is running around $78 a square foot. And people say, well, old houses cost more money and old buildings cost, and this is buildings, I don't care whether it's a high school I did or whatever. $78 a square foot is cheap. Cheap, cheap, cheap. Yeah, right. And I'll sell them for 85 or 90 and make a little profit and move on down the road.
Could you back up your numbers just one? Yeah, I'm envious of you. We do a lot of window restoration, and boy, I don't know how you can do those.
Well, I'm a developer.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is my...
It would twice as much, it would still be...
Right. If you had to hire you to come in and do the work, it would be double to maybe two-thirds more.
It would still be cheap.
But it would still be a payback of about 6 years.
Right.
So what you're saying is you're not counting your labor in the restoration?
Oh, I am. But I have crews of people that I only use subs, but they're subs that I put in business and trained. They're all my apprentices, and I've moved them all to Hannibal because there's a lot of work in Hannibal, and this is what it cost me to do it, and that's making a brand new wood storm too. But also I have to be honest with you. The wood storms got made by students who come to the school. So it's the ultimate Tom Sawyer paint the fence thing, right?
All right. We use new wood, we use reclaimed wood on our.
I use some southern yellow pine, some fir, some reclaimed wood. It just depends. Yeah. Okay. Always quarter sawn. Always. Yeah.
And those aren't adjustable storms then?
Yeah, they have removable glass panels from the inside of the house. And I think there's a picture of it here. But anyway. So original use of this property was office and residential. So Mr. Lamb had his law office in there, and he lived there with his family. Our work began June 1st, 2009. We're 80% complete. I still haven't finished plugging up all the air infiltration. And these are the numbers that we've gotten already. We anticipate being done this summer. Commercial and private financing both on the property. There is an example of a window. Can you see the divided lights? That has a full storm window over it, exterior wood. There it is again.
Were there shutters on the photo?
There were, and we'll make those eventually, yeah. And the storm window, what's interesting about the shutter bed is 1 3/4 inches deep. So we're able to do a storm and a shutter that will fit into the opening and actually close too. This is the inside of it, of that particular window. And you can see that the top and bottom sashes operate. Be an educated consumer. There's all kinds of financial incentives out there. Financing package bankers could. This is getting into a little bit of stuff for the Main Street program that I was doing. So, anyway, anybody have any more questions about this? Listen. Old buildings and houses are one of our greatest assets. If we understand how they work, and it's hard in an hour and a half to explain exactly how an old building works, but every single person sitting in this room has some appreciation for old buildings or you wouldn't be here. If it weren't for people like Kathy Morgan, who helps organize these kinds of things, you wouldn't be sitting here. You have very enlightened city employees here, very enlightened. And she's also one of my best friends, and she's smart. I wish she'd take more baths, but that's all.
Thank you.
try, but these people keep me too busy.
No, seriously, this is fun. Do you catch that I care about this? This is important. This is our built environment. This is our history. And not only our history, but it's the history that we can live in and live comfortably in if we use common sense and we understand how our buildings work. So go forth and how many people live in an old building? Okay, you all have life sentences. Go home and take care of them.